Well, good afternoon, all, and welcome to those in person and online to our Strategic Landpower Dialogue discussion. I'm General Bob Braun, President and CEO of the Association of the United States Army, and it's great to be here for another edition of the AUSA CSIS Strategic Landpower Dialogue. To those online, you may notice that we're in a different location than usual. We're not at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. We're actually here for the first time in conjunction with Global Force in Huntsville, Alabama, to bring you the Strategic Landpower Dialogue. Huntsville is a home to Redstone Arsenal, the U.S. Army Materiel Command, the U.S. Army Aviation and Missile Command, the U.S. Army Space and Missile Defense Command. You can see how we say it's an Army town, and all kinds of other Department of Defense organizations. So great to be here. Huntsville is a great city at the heart of innovation and driving lethality for our Army and the Joint Force. So we're really excited to be here, and I want to thank the Center for Strategic and International Studies for this great partnership with AUSA. They do a fantastic job. And then certainly thank General Dynamics. We couldn't bring this to you without General Dynamics and their tremendous support and sponsorship of this event. And we couldn't be more excited to have a real superstar with us today, General Jim Rainey, the commander of the U.S. Army Futures Command. Back for his second Strategic Landpower Dialogue, and his first one was extremely popular. We'll hear from him on U.S. Army transformation efforts, key Army Futures Command acquisition priorities, and his vision for the Army of 2040, among other topics. During his first Strategic Landpower Dialogue discussion back in June of 2024, General Rainey observed that the change to the character of warfare is happening faster than at any time since World War II. Changing character faster than any time. And looking at ongoing conflicts over the past 10 months since General Rainey made those comments, we see how true his statement really was. Adaptation and innovation are key to the success in today's environment. But at the same time, we must remember that the human being on the ground, their resilience, their grit, their intuition, and determination is still the core of warfighting. Fortunately, Army Futures Command has a great leader to navigate this complex environment and ensure our Army is and remains the most lethal land force in the world. I'll only briefly summarize General Rainey's bio. We don't want to take up too much time. You can find it online at the AUSA or CSIS events page. General Rainey was commissioned as an infantry officer in the Army from Eastern Kentucky University in 1987. And he holds a master's degree in advanced military arts and science from the School of Advanced Military Studies and a master's in public administration from Troy University. He has served a variety of command and leadership positions, from platoon leader all the way up to division commander, and then including a key job, Deputy Chief of Staff G357 for the United States Army, and then the U.S. Army Combined Arms Center at Leavenworth Commander. He now serves, as I mentioned earlier, as the commander of Army Futures Command, which was established in 2018, and he took command of AFC in October of 2022. General Rainey has led over 17,000 soldiers and civilians to ensure the Army and its soldiers remain at the forefront of technological innovation and warfighting ability. So without further ado, I'll now hand it over to Center for Strategic and International Studies, Dr. Tom Carrico, who will moderate our discussion.
Well, thank you, General Braun, and thanks to the whole AUSA team for helping to pull this together. It's always a great day for an Army conference in Huntsville, Alabama. As General Braun mentioned, this is our sixth Strategic Landpower Dialogue series, and I know we hear a lot this week at the Global Force Conference about multi-domain operations and such, but I always like to begin this by repeating the obvious, that you can't spell homeland without land. And our speaker today has emphasized that quite a bit. So we've got a lot of topics, and I've got a lot of questions that I'll be posing to you, General Rainey. But thanks to the resilient Army networks from the new Army Command and Control, CFT, we've got questions coming securely to this tablet from online. I've already got 10 that have come in, so please go online and submit them, and I'll be able to direct them to General Rainey as well. General, Bob Braun just mentioned there your comment about the rapidly changing character of warfare. Before we dig into anything about Army Futures Command, anything TIC and all that kind of stuff, let's start from the beginning about how you see the threat environment changing, especially. What are you seeing in Ukraine and CENTCOM and the Red Sea, all that kind of stuff? Let's start with the threat.
Yeah, thanks. And before we start, thanks to AUSA, General Braun, your leadership, your team, another world-class event. You know, the opportunity to gather and talk. You know, I did more industry engagements in the last 2 days. You saved countless TDY dollars. You know, me and other Army senior leaders, and great to see everybody and in the crowd and online. Thanks for 1,600. I drive the prime slot. End of the day. So. I think there might even be a couple people out in the audience who don't work for me, which is good. not here as hostages. And Pappas is here, but I'm his ride home, so that doesn't count. No, but I thank you. Yeah, so character of war, right? Just not to be pedantic. Nature of war, immutable things that are not changing, probably will never change. And let me start there. The good news for the United States Joint Force and U.S. Army is the war remains a contest of will between human beings, which means it's fundamentally a human endeavor, which is good for us because our number one asymmetric advantage over anybody we're ever going to fight is we have better people. We have an all-volunteer force that fight for things they believe in. We don't dump prisons to build our army. So we have a non-commissioned officer corps that is the envy of the world. We sell a lot of stuff, foreign military sales. What you can't buy is the world's best non-commissioned officer corps. We have better leaders and more of them at scale than anybody we're ever going to fight. And the men and women that command our formations have a skill set that's been honed over 16, 20, 24 years and can do things that if we get into a conflict, they will have an advantage over anybody they fight because of the way we train. Right? So, and then the second thing that's also good news is apparently I see no indication that the land is not going to remain a decisive domain. So we fight as a joint force. Every domain matters, but people insist on living on the land. Every joint capability, as awesome as they are, has a land dependency. Starts or stops on land, you need sustainment on land. So people and land are not changing, which means that close combat, dominant land forces, the ability to take things away from the enemy and hold on to things is going to remain decisive wherever we need to fight. And more importantly, I would offer the largest deterrent value because we don't want to fight people. We wanted to convince them they don't want to fight us. Nothing deters like men and women on the ground partnering, training with, and positioning assets. So that's the good news. Now, we're at the most disruptive point in time in the history of warfare, indisputably. The speed and scale of it is unprecedented. You go back to pre-World War II, people were inventing airplanes, combustion engines, radios, crazy, unprecedented disruption, but you only had to figure it out one time, right? The contest was to figure out what those big three things mean. Germans figured it out at first, went this way. We figured it out better, went that way. That's the history of World War II in 10 seconds right there. So what that means is the key characteristic we want to build into our forces is adaptability, right? So the best Army characteristic to have is to be adaptable. Who can see things happening that you're not going to predict, right? The UAV contest in the Ukraine war right now is one of adaptation. It reminds guys my age and General Pappas's age of our fight against, Sergeant Major Daly, a lot of you, the fight against IEDs, right? It was, it was move, counter move, right? We figured out how to attack the network. but it was iterative and constant. So I think that the ability to adapt faster is something. And again, that plays to our strength because we teach leaders, right? We train people for the known, but we educate our leaders for the unknown. So we bake in that inherent adaptability to look at a complex problem and solve it faster. So I can go on. I'm going to talk some tomorrow about some of the things that are absolutely urgent in terms of changes that we should get after.
Yeah.
But the other big thing I would say about the characteristic thing is the challenge for the U.S. Joint Force is to look at what's happening in places like Gaza and the Ukraine and say, okay, of that, which is fundamentally changing and disruptive that we absolutely need to do something about, right? We have the best tanks in the world. The next time they go to war, we need to have an answer to fiber optic guided FPV right now, right? No Army leader wants to see videos of a U.S. rifle squad helpless against a swarm of UAVs, right? We need to put that kit in their hands like before they go to war again. So there's this sense of urgency, but of the things we're seeing, you should ask yourself, would the U.S. Joint Force fight that way? Would we have the same problem? And there's examples in that space also. The ruthless approach and ethic we have about training makes us able to maneuver, right? Mission command, the way we our units get better when they lose commo with their higher headquarters. You know what I mean? Like, you send a brigade. My favorite day as a division commander, you go out to NTC, they got the awesome brigade. The day they do the Dr. Doom thing and they chemical attack the brigade, one, it's hilarious, but two, unless you're, once you're not in miles anymore, it's a lot better to watch. But what happens is about 2 hours later, company troop battery commanders who don't have commo with anybody say, well, we should probably do something. And they start taking ground and attacking the enemy and conducting reconnaissance. So that kind of advantage that you get with a well-trained maneuver force, I would like to think would be different than some of the static, so are you learning something by watching two armies fight, defense on defense? And what would that look like with the sum of the U.S. Joint Force and the U.S. Army's ethic and competency in maneuver warfare? Because we got to prioritize what we fix. So long answer, but Tom's tough. I got to take most of the time, so he can't ask me hard questions.
Well, let me pull the thread on that threat piece in your 10-second history of World War II, which I'm going to remember. You said there's these disruptors. So let me, what are the top, let's just say 3, however many disruptors that you see on the battlefield in recent years, Ukraine, Israel, et cetera, like that? I think you mentioned the FPVs, right? That clearly jumps out. But what are the other disruptors? I'm not future casting. In terms of the recent developments and demonstrations of the threat, what stands out to you?
Precision and mass. So, me and people my age, maneuver warfare, combined arms officers, usually looked at a firing problem through the context of, okay, I can either shoot mass at it, battalion 3, that's a lot of $5,000 155 rounds. They solve a lot of problems. Or I found the enemy's S-400 or his command post, so I want to hit a 10-digit grid with precision. But it was a choice. I think what's most interesting about what I'm observing with UAVs, pick a category, FPV now, it'll be something else next month, is it looks like that those two things are merging, which is a huge opportunity. Imagine precision mass and the potential of that, where commanders can fly 100 things that'll hit a 10-digit grid. That's pretty interesting to me. Clear indications of a merger of offense and defensive fires, which will be really disruptive for the Army. Can't have a thank God somebody 20 years ago decided to put them both at Fort Sill, because it looks to me like, we're not going to have the luxury of having a protection enterprise built around air defense and an offensive fires enterprise. I think those two things are heading towards and we've done that before. Our best counterfire artillery brigades have SOPs and doctrine and radars that if you shoot at them, it triggers a response. But I think that's got to scale across the, a truck company somewhere in the core sustainment area. If somebody shoots at it, something else needs to trigger it. Data-centric warfare would make my top 3. I got a couple other ones, but I got to talk for an hour tomorrow morning, so I'll stop.
Gotcha. Well, somewhere Dick Formica is nodding, I think, approvingly in terms of offense-defense integration fires. And we'll be out to Fire Symposium here in just a couple of weeks, so we can nerd out there about that as well. I've got a lot here, but I also want to pull the thread of what you just said a second ago about training. I think you said it twice.
Yeah.
And so my question to you in terms of connecting training, NTC or otherwise, do you believe we're adapting sufficiently and quickly enough to change Army training to react to what we're seeing on the battlefield today?
I would never say that we were training enough, training hard. We trained to standard until we run out of time. That's how we were raised. No, I wish we had more money to upgrade National Training Center, upgrade JRTC. I have some concerns about, like if you're out there in industry, you know what we need right now is the ability to replicate the UAS threat during training at home station. So, Bradley platoon, tank platoon, shooting gunnery, we got to be able to swarm UAVs on them. Platoon live fire, air assault at JRTC, we got to be able to replicate that threat, and we need to do it at a price point that is ridiculously low. We don't need the Gucci cameras and everything else. We just need to be able to start making sure our lieutenants and sergeants get used to looking up with the same intensity that we secure 360. So there's little things, but I'm very proud of the Army. One thing that we have not done is walked away from the fact that our ability to maneuver is an asymmetric advantage, and we're underpinned by that. I don't know a single senior leader in the Army that would ever willingly send soldiers into harm's way that were untrained, right? So the modernization money that is there comes after we ensure that whatever size Army we have and whatever it looks like is as well trained and well led as possible.
I think connecting that with your previous...
And it's still, the only place I've ever lost a fight is at NTC and JRTC, both Polk and Chaffee, because I'm old. But like that ethic of, your worst day, your worst day in combat is not going to be as bad as your worst day at the National Training Center. I would defer to some guys that got a little closer feel to the operating force, but I was just out there. The way TRADOC takes the worst thing Russia can do and the worst thing China can do and makes a hybrid enemy, and the way General Pappas and his team and FORCECOM, make sure that and the world-class OPFOR and the OC ethic that we have. So I don't think there's anybody that we're going to fight that is anywhere near as good at training as us, but we got to continuously update it.
No, but I just want to highlight the one thing you highlighted there in terms of nobody wants to see a U.S. unit being attacked by giant swarms of drones trying to fend off, but that's exactly the kind of thing to be training.
They're going to get attacked, but that's a fact. I don't want them to be. I don't want them to not have a solution to that problem.
Bingo.
That's what keeps me awake at night.
And we're going to dig into the protection in just a bit here, but let's stay kind of big in terms of the Army vision. When we talked last June, you were talking about the Chief of Staff's priorities about transformation across 3 timelines. Before we kind of dig into that, I wonder if you could just sort of talk about what are those 3 timelines and how are they coming, and then we can kind of dig into it.
Yeah, so we only have one Army, so we have to transform continuously, and that means be better tomorrow than we are today, next year or 2. We also have to fundamentally change some things about the Army that take time, the TAA process, the FIDEP, program of record. And then we also need to be outthinking the enemy in the 30 to 40 time frame, that decade, second and third FIDEP. And it's not either or. We got to be great at all three. The sense of urgency that our chief of staff and our secretary have about right now we have a bias for that transforming in contact period of time, which is kind of a floating window of this afternoon to 24 months. We got to get better, and rightly so. I would say that I won't speak for the chief, but he's deep in that space. And you heard General Ryan in the panel he was on. I thought that was phenomenal. So we have a sense of urgency. The only limitation to it is how much money can we get and how fast can we move it. AFC doesn't have a big role to play in TIC. I mostly flag technology we have that is ready to go. The beginning of AFC, we were real successful with what we called soldier touch points, getting the operator on the kit and feedback to industry. What the chief challenged us on and we responded to is, why not give it to a brigade that's actually doing something for 9 months? And I'm like, yeah, that's even better, But bigger than TIC, and Joe mentioned it, and I'm not just saying this because General Pappas is here, but the material's the material. It's good. We'll get it better. We don't have enough. The organizational innovation, that's what's fascinating to me, because that can't happen. I have people that can innovate on technology. I'm glad that we have young soldiers innovating with technology. General Brito and I don't have formations to go out and figure out what the next DeVarty is going to look like, or how to turn an IBCT into an MBCT. So the organizational innovation that's happening at TIC. And then the next step that we got to get better at is we need the operating force to come back and say, hey, here's how we have to train different. And then the most important thing is somebody needs to tell TRADOC, hey, these are new leader skills that we don't have resident in these formations, and we got to start training our leaders. I've not seen any ability to say, hey, the thing we used to have to do, we don't need to do anymore. You know what I mean? So nothing came off the job jar, but a whole bunch of stuff just got added at echelon, starting with corporal up through, division corps commander. So that's TIC. Deliberate transformation is the execution of things that are in our signature modernization efforts. We need the next infantry fighting vehicle. We need to update our tank. We got a major program with FLARA, the ability to vertical envelopment our enemies with infantry squads. I don't think that's going away. Not only do I not think that's going away, I think that's how you stay out of trench warfare. So things like that take a little more time, that are a little more complicated, that have more DOTMO PFP implications. If you have to build a new motor pool because you're building a new piece of kit, that's not TIC, And then concept-driven transformation, that's really what AFC puts the majority of our weight. Dave Hodney and his team out of the Future Concept Center, that's wargaming, figuring out what is fundamentally going to be different. And in that space, you have opportunities to do really big things. So all three of them matter.
Can I ask about maybe some you mentioned vehicles there, but specific successes and shortcomings that have been identified that stand out to you from that process so far?
Which one? I mean, like TIC?
Yeah, from TIC.
Yeah, I mean, like we put kit in the hands of soldiers, and I got to be careful with the industry guys, and they're getting user feedback, right? Like, if you build a piece of kit that's not good in the humidity, that's designed to deter China in the Pacific, that's a little bit of a problem. Somebody came back to me like, hey, this is great, but it doesn't work in the cold. That's a problem if you're in Alaska or anywhere else that gets cold. So like those kind of things. Chief hates a piece of equipment we have. He's like, I want to kill it. And I said, don't worry, it just committed suicide. We took it out to the PCC, and it like went green to red like a frog in a blender. Like 3 of the 4 of them broke before they got out of the dust bowl. So like but that's not failure. That's awesome. I just saved a ton of money and figured out and learned a whole bunch of stuff.
And I heard you last year's fire symposium.
I'll tell you another one. We were well intended. We were taking a platform-based approach to a lot of things, and we figured out that innovating at the round, like companies are so good, the advances in energetics, we were going after a big platform and figured out that we can probably we're building a platform to take a bigger gun. You need a bigger breech, you need a bigger vehicle, more weight, more gas, more power. And then like somebody said, well, we haven't figured out the platform yet, but we doubled the range of the rounds with a better energetic solution. Did we waste money on that platform, or did that lead us to a gigantic savings and a fundamental different approach?
Right. I've heard you say more than once that innovation is spurred on when somebody's shooting at you.
Yeah.
And I've heard you say that the need for adaptation should be measured in weeks, right? Not months and years. So how would you say the AFC is getting after that and incentivizing that cultural shift? What are you trying to instill, and how's that coming? And what are your metrics for success on that?
Yeah, I would answer that in the context of the Army more than AFC. I think that what I actually said is the closer you are to getting shot at, the better you are at innovating. Which is true. The hedgerow, the famous hedgerow story where a dude from Kentucky knew how to weld, and a dude from New Jersey who knew how to drive a bulldozer figured out, Now what was also that part of that story is guys like Eisenhower and Marshall said it and said, okay, let's bring the defense industrial base to bear in support of that specialist and staff sergeant. So that is happening across the Army. I think young people, I'm not a 60-year-old, I remember my grandpa, oh, your generation's going to ruin America. I'm not one of those dudes. The young people are way more upside than problems, Some of them should have played contact sports. They'll fix that down at Fort Benning in basic training. You taste your own blood in your mouth, when you're basic training or whatever, but they're phenomenally adaptive. It's a core, it's almost like inherent, the ability to hand them a piece of technology. Trainability, the requirement documents we've written recently in AFC are about trainability. If you bring a piece of tech and you can't give it to a soldier and it takes them more than 8 hours to figure it out, you probably got some garbage product there, So I don't know if I answered the question, but it's happening all over the force. It's happening naturally. Leaders in the force, I think, are doing a good job of balancing, because being able to walk 20 kilometers with a heavy ruck in the rain and kill people at the end of the you know what I'm saying? That's more important than innovating, because you can't innovate your way out of, the horror of being in a rifle squad and a tank platoon when nothing works except for the enemy. You got to be able to win that fight. So I'm pretty optimistic about it.
Good. So I think you've already mentioned Project Convergence.
Now, if the Army stood up an organization to innovate, that's when you'll know we've lost our mind. Down in units, it's just the operating forces managing it real well.
Gotcha. Which means it's cultural, right? You got to get it down to as low as level. Okay.
I think so.
So you mentioned Project Convergence, I think a couple times. How would you characterize the recent activities of PC and the feedback and what's coming next there, especially in terms of adapting to large-scale combat operations?
Yeah. So bias acknowledged. General Murray and the original AFC crew, starting the idea of Project Convergence and watching it grow for 5 repetitions now. And I mean grow by getting better, not getting more expensive and bigger. I'm very, very proud of the AFC team that's behind that. It really takes the whole Army. It takes ASOL teammates. It takes industry. So it's still ongoing. So Part A out in the National Training Center just wrapped up. Part B, for the first time ever, we're actually going all the way out into theater, into Indo-PACOM to experiment, at actual, so you can't walk from one tent to another to work out a connectivity problem with one of those toxins in Hawaii and one of them is Guam. So we're raising the bar every year. But I'll talk about NTC. So hundreds of good technology from great companies, the 18th Airborne Corps, 82nd Airborne, 1st Brigade, a 1st Armored Division. So, of the scope and scale of a regular NTC rotation, of which I think we have about 8 a year. So you're talking about a gigantic investment from the Army to trade a brigade training opportunity to an experiment for the Army. So I feel like we owe the Army back a lot. I was really happy. We had some things that didn't work. That's good. We validated Next Gen C2. So a year ago, we did a prototyping. This time, we absolutely validated that we can do that. The human-machine integration thing, I think everybody, we're on a path, and there's a clear acknowledgement that figuring out who's going to pair unmanned systems with humans in a way that optimizes both of them. Now that'll be like probably the focus of PC6 over the next 12 to 15 months. So I'm going to be, here's the other thing. The Army's ability to host a joint and partner experiment in the dirt is a gigantic contribution of the Army to the Joint Force. You find things out in the Central Corridor of the National Training Center that you don't find out walking around the Pentagon, whipping slides at people. I've had both those jobs. One's a lot funner than the other one, but it's good to have cool concepts, cool videos, cool booths. Go out to the National Training Center. Can your UAV fly when the winds are 40 knots? Put a Starlink terminal out. You find out that rodents eat through, rodents like fiber optic cable. The rabbit's going to chew through your stuff overnight. Like, that you know what I'm saying? It's awesome. It's awesome. Yeah. PC is awesome. Come out. If you haven't been there, you're missing out.
Good stuff. Well, let me shift to what you've laid out as AFC's 4 big priorities. Command and control, expand and maneuver, cross-domain fires, and formation-based layered protection. Let me just start with the first one. And you threatened in our advanced meeting to spend the whole hour on command and control, and I'm gonna let's nerd out a little bit on that, which is to say. And let me start with the most simplistic and I think fundamental question, which is everybody converts it to an acronym, and usually when you convert things to an acronym, you lose something. What is the difference between command and control, and what does that difference tell us, and what do we need to be reminded about that difference?
Yeah, so command and control is a warfighting function in our current doctrine. I think it's moving to a warfighting system. If you want to, if you're a system theory student, it's getting more complex than just a function. It is the most important thing. If you cannot command and control your formation, nothing else matters. And if you can command and control your formation, and it's a U.S. formation with the quality of leaders and the training that we have, you're going to be okay. You'll solve any problem. So it's that important. Command, you've all read, it's the art and science of command. What I tell Pat Ellis, the great director of the Command and Control CFT, is, hey, let's put the commander back into command and control.
What do you mean by that?
Well, just Rainey's observation, not official Army policy. Over the last decade or so, we've turned the commander's warfighting function / system into a signal, cyber, data enterprise. I grew up, you went to the field, the first 24 hours sucked, everybody had to figure stuff out, then all the commo worked, and the 3 got to be the 3, and the 4 got to do great sustainment, and the 2 got to do intel. You go out to some of these systems we have now, the whole staff spends the whole field problem trying to move 0s and 1s around, which are important, but they don't hurt. They don't kill people. You got to be able to train. So, and it's nobody's fault except for the commander, because we let it happen. So let's get the commander back in charge and, understand, visualize, describe, direct, lead, and assess, right? Ops process, that's what commanders do. And they got to be able to do all those things, and they got to be in charge, and they can't be dependent on a gigantic staff. They got to be the best at everything in their formation. Control is what staffs do. Commanders command, staffs control. Impose my will on the enemy, our own formation, which sometimes is harder, and the terrain, right? Impose my will, control that. I'm going to issue guidance. You turn it into an order that enables intent-based warfighting, and you pay attention to what's going on. We're not going to have targeting meetings in large-scale combat operations. I'm going to tell somebody, here's my priority of fires. Somebody's going to stick an attack guidance matrix in my face. I'm going to say, yeah, move those two, and that's it. And then things need to happen. So command and control. And I'm with you on the acronyms. Like, I challenge, whenever anybody says C5ISRT,
that conversations go downhill.
I'm like, what are the fives? Like, and two of them are the same freaking thing. Like, we don't have phones anymore anywhere except for maybe my grandma's house. So, like, we've lost our mind. It's command and control. We got commanders. They have staffs. The only reason we have staffs is so the commanders command. Let's get back to basics and leverage our superpower that is commander-centric, intent-based warfare. Nobody can do it like us.
Let me I don't not push back, but let me pull the thread of what you said of there's too much focus on, I think, you're pushing zeros around and stuff like that. And yet, when I think about, on a bad day, the commander may not be able to have that active, continuous engagement. Mission command is all about that. And so in that respect, isn't the focus on the beeps and squeaks and getting those things hardened and all that kind of stuff to hopefully be able to preserve the active and continuous engagement of the commander? Otherwise, look, they may just get jammed out, and that comms are going to be cut out.
Yes. So data-centric warfare, thank you. Data-centric warfare is the future. Whoever figures that out is going to have such an asymmetric advantage. So that's what Next Gen C2 is about. That's why it's the chief's #1 priority. And really, if you think about AI, LLMs, machine learning, what is happening, whoever creates a state of data accuracy and accessibility that then enables what's happening with AI, LLMs, machine learning, so you can take advantage of that, is going to give you such a marked advantage. It's going to deter. It's going to, it's a counter to magazine depth. It solves all of our problems. So yeah, we should be all in on that. I didn't mean to make light of that. I meant that we can't have the entire staff focused on doing that at the expense of dominating their warfighting system. Break. We need to be able to fight when that stuff doesn't work, right? The good news is if we can't talk, the enemy won't be talking. You know what I mean? So we got to win fights with hand and arm signals, whistles, tracer rounds. The PACE plan is not going away. But at the high end, primary and alternate means of communication. The U.S., with our dominance in AI, technology, every advantage favors us. We should double down on data-centric warfare to capitalize on that. So it's not either or, it's both.
And to part of what you just said there, I've heard you say that a big part of staying ahead of the Chinese is going to require us to slow down and confuse their ability to understand and make decisions.
Yeah.
And so I hope nobody comes up with the C3 counter C2 kind of an effort, but that's the idea, which is, and by the way, that's going to, I think, potentially be a pretty significant counter to the promise of precision mass, is if you can confuse their targeting, all that kind of stuff, they're just back to mass again, right? So how do you think about the priority of countering their C2, of confusing them, back to deception and all of this?
No, it's a great point. And actually, so back to you said 4 priorities. We have modernization priorities. Those are the chiefs and secretaries. What we're talking about in AFC is the emergence of like 4 big challenges that we're thinking about and experiment and wargaming against. So the first and primary one is C2 and counter C2. So it's an acknowledgement that no matter how fast we get, we are going to have to put 49, 50, 51 cents of every dollar into countering the enemy's ability to command and control, right? Because they're going to be in fixed sites. I'll tell you another big one. The U.S. is not going to, the U.S. is something that's not changing. We are not going to walk away from values-based warfare. That's what separates us, right? So for me to practice ethical decision-making and ethical management of violence and kill people, I need more time, right? We're not going to go full auto. We don't drop bombs into schoolyards. We do collateral damage assessments. We value minimum force, proportionality. So I think our system needs to be 10 times faster than the Chinese. So we're going to be faster than them, but part of that 10x advantage is going to require us to slow down their command and control system by doing a lot of things: deception, being unpredictable, attacking critical nodes, confusing them, degrading his ability. Right? So the ubiquitous sensing of the battle, we're a couple years away from everybody being able to see everything all the time. So that means you can't maneuver to hide. You have to contest the enemy's ability to understand what he is seeing, not contest his ability to see you, right? Again, plays to our tremendous advantage, because if one of our commanders loses comms, they will make a decision, right? If an enemy goes with fully, top down, we're going to tell our people what to do with the computer screen. As soon as you disrupt that guy's
That's weakness.
That guy's going to stop at that same fork in the road and wait to be told what to do.
Well, let's hope they don't change that culture. So.
Yeah. So, well, they can't change it, because you can't do that unless you got 3 NCOs in a rifle squad. We got more leaders in the lead squad of an infantry rifle platoon than our enemies have in a platoon. And that's before you talk about how much better ours are.
Well, let me shift to the second one, which is cross-domain fires. A lot of attention in Indo-PACOM on various maritime and aerial platforms and such. But as you said, humans have a bad habit of mostly living on land most of the time. What is it about fires from land? What are the characteristics of fires from land that is useful and interesting, and that provide the joint commander different advantages?
Yeah. So if you don't mind, so cross-domain fires, there's currently 5 domains. The ability to shoot from the land into the other 4. So across a domain is why we use that terminology. Back to your point about words matter.
And not everything can be multi-domain, so that's good.
Well, you got a multi-domain, I think there's an IPA called multi-domain IPA at the bar I was at last night. I mean, we kind of the Army kind of, we like the branding thing sometimes to the point where it's not useful. So Army forces shooting from the land into all 4 of the other domains. And some we're better at. I would not want to be on the user end of offensive cyber operations from the U.S. Joint Force, for example. And some of them we're not as good as we need to be. So that's what it's about. And the equally important to our commanders is back to training and education, the competency of being able to bring effects from all 4 domains to bear at the decisive point in support of my ground maneuver plan. Right, that's something we need to get better at. But to answer your question, and it's not, listen, we fight as a joint force, right? I'm not making a case for land-based fires at the expense of air, maritime, right? This is about providing combatant commanders optionality and creating dilemmas for the enemy. So what are the advantages of land-based fires? Is they're harder to find, they're mobile, they're persistent, they don't fly over. There's not an ATO, you know what I mean? You don't need to figure out how many times in 96 hours am I going to have a really good U.S. Army SF detachment with long-range rockets, right? So it's persistent, it's mobile, Now, it has
distributable.
disadvantages. It has disadvantages. The sustainment's much more challenging. When the enemy does find you, survivability is extremely. So it's about giving a combatant commander a toolkit that he or she can choose to use however they want, and not letting the Chinese build a defense against one part of the joint force.
Yeah.
Forcing them to worry and defend everywhere.
And you said 5 domains. How are you thinking about, and how is the Army thinking about non-kinetic fires? And how are we wrapping our arms around that from a doctrinal and operational perspective?
Well, I wish I could phone a friend, great General Beagle and his team here. I haven't read lately, last couple months, but whether it's kinetic, non-kinetic, lethal, non-lethal, I think I'm real interested in the idea of reversible and non-reversible. Because kinetic and non-kinetic, it's like multi-domain. I'm not sure everybody's tracking. You ask 5 people, you get 6 answers. So I think we need to be clear in our doctrine. But when I say fires, I absolutely believe that the lethal, non-lethal, whatever you call it, they're inseparable, and it's becoming more so. And offense and defense are becoming hopelessly intertwined. And I would, the firing solution, commanders shouldn't be limited by whether or not they want to do reversible or irreversible things to the enemy.
The third category is expanded maneuver, but there's a formulation that I've heard you use a couple times, and I love it, which is the maneuver in support of fires as opposed to fires in support of maneuver, that it is the increased salience of fires. How's your thinking on that? What are you seeing on that front?
Well, it's never going to be, only one of the two, but and I'm not a historian, but I've been doing this a while, and I like to read. If you look at the history of the U.S. Army, we pretty much maneuvered to emplace fires. Patton's great. You got to have a rifle squad that can win, but you ought to do everything else before you do that. Then we got into the GWAT for all the right reasons. For almost 2 decades, we've been training. My division command, I was talking about intel drives fires, drives maneuver. All my peers had different versions of that. We talk about shaping things with fires to enable maneuver. I believe large-scale combat ops, especially in the Pacific, we're heading back to that more traditional, especially at the operational level. The U.S. Army is going to grab pieces of ground in order to emplace and enable fires. And I think at the tactical level too. I mean, the close fight is not going away. We absolutely have to maintain that dominance, but man, is it getting lethal. 500 to a kilometer plus or minus from the line of contact, like holy crap, that there ain't a lot of good solutions in there. So before we commit our most precious and best weapon system, our soldiers, our squads, we better have done everything we can to not make that necessary. He'll help in the joint force. We were working with our sister services. It's a big part of what we're going to do out in Project Convergence out in the Pacific. The Air Force is going to need to position assets in austere locations and generate combat power. They're great at that. They are going to need somebody to go grab that ground, hold that ground, sustain them on that ground, maintain them on that ground. The Navy, world class, they have to touch the land. They have to go to port to upload. Their fuel and their fuel enterprise is Army provided, tied to the land. So we're going to have to control ports, not the whole thing. We're going to have to go grab enough of a port and control that to facilitate the Navy's, actually the maritime component. We're not going to build iron mountains, but we're going to need some iron hills in some places.
Lots of iron molehills.
That means somebody's got to take it away from the enemy, hold it, secure it against 360-degree threat. So That kind of maneuver to enable firing, I think, is more likely, especially in the Indo-PACOM theater.
And the other priority is basically not counter fire, but it's protection against fires.
Yeah.
Formation-based layer protection.
Yep.
You know, when I hear that is how much of your thinking on this is about new and different formations, and how much of this is about just, no kidding, the need to, as you said, look up and make sure every formation can itself be protected with different layers?
Yeah, so this is another big one. I think this is the last one, right? Okay, so I'm the AFC commander. I talk to a lot of industry. I get talked to by people about counter UAS solutions. I get talked to people about electronic warfare. I get talked to by people about active protection systems on tanks and Bradleys. I have people that talk to me about tactical cannons, high power microwave, lasers, right? So all this stuff is, and it's nobody's fault. The Army buys things, we buy stuff, but we fight formations. So I'm trying to flip that. What we're looking for is somebody to come in and say, pick a formation, a current one or an emerging one. My favorite example is an M1 tank, a U.S. Army tank company, 14 tanks, badass. Don't want to fight one, right? We expect every one of those tanks to kill 10. Platoons kill battalions. 32 kills per tank, 18 of them at the ready. That is an awesome formation. That same formation has no ability to protect itself.
From the air, you're thinking.
Well, pick it. They can't counter jam right now. Long run, they can. The only way they can protect themselves from another tank is to be better trained and faster. So we got a long rod penetrator problem. We can be jammed easily. We don't have an organic counter UAS capability in there, right? So the worst thing we could do is spend $1 million per tank, plus add a ton or two and a bunch of swap to try and protect each tank from everything at every location. So what I'm interested in is, how about if a group of companies came together, said, I'm the best at APS, I'm the best at EW, maybe we only need to put it on 4 vehicles and we can throw a counter UAS bubble. Or better yet, if we put 4 robots in that formation, right, that could pick up 4 corners of that, not world-class. Yeah, not world-class autonomy. I mean, that's coming, but not yet. But just simple things like the ability to remote a good counter UAS capability that would stop most things. So that's what we need. We need companies to come together, look at a formation, and say, against the following threats, which are pretty knowable, using all available kinetic and non-kinetic capabilities, we can protect this formation while it's sitting still and while it's attacking. So that is and I am an optimist. I believe that as we clearly articulate that problem statement and think about it in the context of formations, I believe industry will self-organize in a way that is going to be super powerful. It's repeatability of what we were able to do with Next Gen C2 with industry. I want to try and do that with cross-domain fires, with formation-based layer protection.
Well, let me just highlight that you said robots. I think about the new pack mules, right? But with maybe it's robot dogs with CUAS systems on them or something like that. Yeah. How are you, and what are you doing to try to encourage innovative thinking on this? And what are the challenges, but what are the opportunities, and what is the vision for that very different looking formation or set of formations where you got robot dogs running around those tanks?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of what I call characteristic and need statements. A couple page document, very clearly defined problem statement, couple paragraphs of characteristics we're interested in. That should be first contact with industry. not a 500-page RFP, not a 800-page requirements document. Just go out to industry and say, hey, here's the problem we're trying to solve. So, to answer your question, we are trying to figure out how do you optimize a combination of humans and machines in a way that dramatically increases the value, lethality, survivability of the formation. So offload risk onto robots, no blood for first contacts, one of my favorite things to say. Like the technology today, there is no excuse for us ever entering a building. The first thing in a building the next time we go to war should never be a human. We shouldn't find IEDs and minefields with vehicles that have humans in them. I mean, that is, the enemy's always, the enemy's always going to have a good day. You're going to have a bad day, but there is no technological reason why we should make contact with a human being. So offload risk onto machines, and most importantly, so that the humans we have are doing the things that only humans can do. Because the cognitive load we're stacking on leaders is getting pretty significant. And what are those things? Robots are not going to be curious. Computers are not curious. They don't there's no ethical. They don't do ethical decision making. They don't demonstrate free will, thank God. But like one of the superpowers is the U.S. fight man and woman. Is they do stuff that nobody told them to do. Sometimes they do the opposite of what you told them to do because they know it's right. So you're not going to write an LLM for initiative, I don't think, not anytime soon. So who puts those things together in a way that makes a better formation at the end of the day? So examples, one use case is how do you make a formation better, right? Infantry company, armor company, artillery battery, air defense battery, engineer company. Come look at what we have and what we do and tell me how you could bring autonomy and really unmanned systems to bear. And it's not just, you say robots, people think ground. It's unmanned system. UAVs are unmanned systems, subsurface, surface, subterranean, right? So look at a formation and say, here's some ways you could do that better. Lower the risk to the force. We ought not breach minefields, and we're not. Out of Project Convergence, the technology just blew me away on the ability to, we started a year ago. I was like talking to my guys. I'm like, hey, I want the MICLIC to not have humans in it. Like, did that, live fired, awesome. We got with some companies and started saying, hey, this is what we're trying to do. They're like, okay, well, how much, do you really care about that? Like that MICLIC, we're all proud. Like, look at that, unmanned MICLIC. They're like, that's kind of, what are you trying to do? Like, well, we're trying to put those explosive charges in a line through that mine wire obstacle. They're like, okay, well, would it be all right if we just put a UAV up and map the minefield and then launch 20 UAVs that had line charges that land exactly where you want them? I'm like, yeah, that'd be cool. And we did it. We didn't do it. They did it. And then we got them with one of Drew Pappas' great engineer companies, and there some captains, a couple sergeants are like, could you fly that stuff to the other end of the obstacle and start breaching your way backwards? Because that would be really cool. Like, and the young guys like, yeah, do you understand how UAVs work, man? You just like, they go wherever you tell them. And like,
Not
you know what I mean? So that kind of innovation, make our formations better. Another one is look at everything we do in the Army and say, why couldn't we do this autonomously? 10 truck company exists to move X amount of stuff this far, takes this many humans. Aviation FARP operations, bunch of trucks, bunch of gas, really dangerous. How many humans do you really need? Because there are a few. Like, I wouldn't want a robot, mixing gas and ammo, while I was sitting in something that, like, I'm probably not, I want to look out and see another set of eyeballs somewhere out there in the dark. But most of that, you could do it. And then the third one is, like, where could autonomy lead to a fundamentally different way of doing things? Penetrating A2AD with autonomous systems, What would you do? How would you do an air assault or an airborne operation different if you had the ability to bring autonomous systems to bear to create the conditions and offload risk? So we've got a draft characteristic and need statement. It's going to have use cases. We're going to ask industry to just come back and show us what you can do.
Well, two more questions, then we'll wrap up.
There, but
yes, indeed. One is you alluded a couple times now about you want companies to get together as teams to come and solve these problems, to get after your need statement.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of, I would say, pointing at industry by all kinds of different military leaders and that kind of stuff. How is the government doing in terms of becoming a better customer, because of a better monopsony? And is there sufficient adaptation on the contract side and to get to the things that and what are the metrics by how we ought to measure the government becoming a better customer?
Yeah, no, that's really, really fair. I think the leaders that I'm around, our chief and our secretary, clearly acknowledge that we're part of the problem, right? In fact, I would say that probably control what you can control and fix yourself first. Our new secretary said during his testimony, the Army's got to be a better customer. So I think there's an acknowledgement and an understanding of that, and it's everywhere. So I'll start with myself. We got to write better requirements. We got to explain the problem we're trying to solve. We got to be more iterative and open with industry, and let industry do what they're great at. We need to come up with we need to lean into the acquisition abilities we have, and we need to come up with new approaches. We need to look and listen. Acquisition professionals, the humans are awesome. It's not a human thing. They behave the way they're. Incentives determine outcomes. So. Is cost, schedule, and performance the metric that we should be using? I don't think so. I think the only metric that matters is capability in a formation. So from the time we say we need something until it is a no-kidding capability in a formation to include the training and leader development, everything else wrapped around it, nothing else matters. If you can do it at a good cost point, that's extra credit. But so we got to look at how we are incentivizing the acquisition enterprise, and are we organized properly around requirements and capabilities? And I think you'll see some of that out of our new leadership. That's not really my lane. Contracting, I got to get better. And the same thing. The contracting professionals are awesome. We don't have enough of them, and they're all over the place. And we need to upskill them. We got to be leaning into. If I picked a group of people that should be first in line to go to how to leverage large language models and data centricity, it would probably be the contracting workforce, because there's a huge opportunity to go way faster and do this way better. But we got to write better contracts. We got to write them faster. We got to write them different. We got to test different. Love the testing guys. We test a freaking UAV like there's going to be a little tiny person in there or something. I mean, they're unmanned for a reason. Is it safe? Does it work? It's not a helicopter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We test software like with the rigor we would put into a chemical detection kit. Like, if it sucks, nobody's going to use it. Get rid of it. So, and then how we field stuff. That's what bringing this full circle. That's another superpower of TIC, right? Now we're fielding emerging technology in a different way, iteratively. We're buying tranches of good company level UAVs and getting feedback from 3, 4, 5 brigades that are using different kit. That's informing our acquisition approach. We're adjusting requirements. So. Yeah, we got to, the Army's got to do better at all points. It would really help if we had a little more ability to move the money. The fiscal agility thing, I'm telling you, is that if we could just move, whatever money we have, we got a lot of money. I don't ever ask for more, but of the money we have, the ability to move it around at the speed of relevance is something the chief's been pushing really hard for, and as soon as we have that, that's going to close the acquisition kill chain, and we'll get better at every aspect of it along the way. Because the first time the chief is sitting around waiting for a piece of kit that he has money for, he's, then it's like, okay, why don't I have it? Because right now it's like, yeah, we're slow at contracting, the requirements a little jacked up, blah, 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 but it doesn't matter anyways because we don't have the money. Once you turn the money on and the technology's already there, it's going to pressurize everybody between, you're either a guy with the government credit card or you got a problem, so I'm famously optimistic. You have to be to be a leader in combat. Nobody follows pessimists around in gunfights. But I'm optimistic that we're going to turn the corner this year.
Well, let me close out with a question I'd like to end these things with, and it's about what you're reading. You've emphasized over the course of this the importance of people, training, education, the experience of having blood in your mouth, these kind of things. The last time we met, we established we were two of the small people that like the book Red God of War in terms of fires. As you think about expand and maneuver, as you think about all these other priorities, what are the things that you're reading? What do you think people ought to be reading? Soldiers, policy folks ought to be reading to be thinking about those priorities?
Well, you can't read enough. So I'll dodge the question. The last book I just finished was Alex Karp's new book, The Technological
really good.
Republic, which was phenomenal. And I believe in a fair amount of pleasure reading occasionally, so I just cranked through Lonesome Dove over my last couple weekends just for my morale. But what I would offer to younger people, if any are watching, is something I learned from Chris Cavoli, who is one of my best friends and probably the smartest human I've ever bumped into, about reading backwards. And the idea behind reading backwards is if you read a great book 10 years ago, Red God of War, and it impactful of you 10 years ago, imagine with that 10 years of learning and experience you now have, how valuable that book's going to be to you. So I've been going backwards in books, classics that have shaped my thinking, and rereading them. And I'm old, so I actually buy books and write in them and highlight stuff. If I listen to an audiobook, it's awesome. I go out and buy the book so I can write in it. So I don't know if that's like a thing anymore. But you go back, you read it, especially if it's your book in your library, you remind yourself of the things that impacted you 10 years ago, but you will be amazed at the new, you might change your mind about something, you might learn something you missed. So, Fehrenbach is a good one. I think any reading anybody does about, there's some great books about the Army's recovery from the Vietnam War, Real Soldiering, Prodigal Soldier. I think there's differences, and it's way more complex problem now. But the way the Army, and I'm not saying we're like post-Vietnam Army, we're still the best Army in the world. Like we got issues, but I would take a U.S. Army formation to combat against anybody, anytime, still, if you had to. But the way the senior leadership of the Army adapted, it's not the big five, now it's the big five, now it's the medium 500 capabilities, but the National Training Center, the way we built an NCO Corps, professional education, the things those leaders did, the all-volunteer force, be all you can be. I mean, there's a lot of analogies. So those two books, the reason you got to read both of them is because Prodigal Soldier is a little bit of a, it's a little bit of how awesome we are bias. Real Soldiering is a little more of a critique. So between the two of them, you get the total picture.
I'm impressed
That'll
with
give
all
you
that.
something to do this weekend.
I'm impressed with all that, but I got to tell you, Lonesome Dove is what jumps out for me.
Yeah.
We don't rent pigs.
Greatest book.
Well, hey, thanks again to AUSA for the partnership here. This has been a fantastic discussion, and thanks again for.
Yeah, hey, thanks everybody. God bless you.
Cheers. That was good. That was good.
Domain IPA.